So you can keep asking those questions in the Q&A, and some of those we'll answer at the end. We do have 30 minutes, I believe, at the end set aside for questions and answers, and then Chuck and some other people are answering the questions in the Q&A as well. So I'm going to be talking mainly about our revamped tools page and some of the features that exist there. I'll also briefly mention about the training page that is to come. So I'm on the main homepage. I scrolled down a little bit. This features section is a new block that we added and updated very, very recently. And so this whole block is also, if you go to our tools page, that is the same block there. So you can access this section either way. So several of these things are also other ways to get to other sections of the website. So report sightings takes you to that same report sightings page I told you about earlier. The EDDMapS app link takes you to that same screenshot that Chuck showed in his presentation about accessing the two primary EDDMapS apps, the EDDMapS app and the EDDMapS Pro app. I showed you earlier about the data upload, and we're going to go over the EDDMapS brand in a later presentation. So just some of the things, I don't have time to go over every single one and click on every single thing, so I'm just going to pick several of these and talk about them just to make sure, again, like Chuck mentioned, these are some tools that we want to make sure people know they exist. And especially for some of these, people knew they exist, but we moved them or maybe slightly renamed them. So the maps section is the same as the maps section up here. So if I'm just going to open that in a new one, click on that, it takes you to our distribution, what was previously called distribution maps page. We made it look prettier. And then we also updated this. So this is for custom maps and queries. That is a clickable icon, and it takes you to what was previously called our advanced query tool page. And then again, these are the same species that have been there for a while. And so these are our normal distribution maps page. I'm just going to show you a couple of these. So I'm going to pick on leafy spurge. I like leafy spurge. So if I click on the county distribution maps for leafy spurge, you see there's a bunch of buttons at the top, and then our presence map for leafy spurge at the bottom. Something that's new, I don't think it was around at the last EDDMapS Summit, but there's two different shades of green now. So let me actually pick ligustrum to show you what that means, what these two different colors of green mean. So privet, some of those look very similar. So you're going to see something, this will be a similar type situation if you look up the knotweeds, the Reinutria spa. So your Japanese giant and your hybrid knotweeds. So you see it has fewer buttons. But what this means, what this top legend up here means, the darker green, the subject, so in this case, ligustrum spa, was reported. The lighter green, subject reported from child taxa, means that this subject itself, ligustrum spa, wasn't reported, but some child taxa, so a species, a subspecies, a variety. If you're higher up in the taxonomic tree, so if this was a family, it could be the genus or the species or so forth. Some child of that subject was reported in that county. So if we look here closer, you see there's the light green that's taking up most of Indiana compared to the dark green that's taking up, well, a lot of the other areas of the country. That means that in Indiana, most of these county records are coming from a species or subspecies only. Whereas this darker green means that at least once in these counties, so going back to our leafy spurge map, there is little to no data that's going to be reported from child taxa. You see a little bit of it up here in Ontario. So there are some subspecies reported up there, but for the most part, a little bit down in California, most of these are coming from this subject, this species level. And then, as Chuck mentioned earlier, we added the inhabit button. So that takes you to the inhabit map for the species, Euphorbia esula. And then we also have future range, future certainty, and future abundance. So if we click on, I'll just pick future range. This takes you to a model that was done by someone other than us, but the data is housed in EDDMapS. And you can see where this species is expected to be in the years 2040 to 2060. The information on this map, so I clicked on that eye, tells you about the project that created this data set. And it's similar with future certainty and future abundance habitat. Those eyes will tell you what these maps are. Now, not every subject are going to have future range, future certainty, future abundance, or the inhabit maps, as you saw with the ligustrum spa map. These 4 buttons didn't exist. So you can just play around with those again. That eye is where you're going to find information about that. So if we go back to the tools page, so that was our maps, the EDDMapS query, if I click on that, it'll take you to these semi-new, several months old at this point, advanced query tool. We've changed the name, it's EDDMapS query now, which means I need to update this document. I've been spending some time recently updating our training materials. So this page, and again, you can get to it from that tools page, or you can get to it from the home page. It's the EDDMapS query link. If you click on EDDMapS query, it takes you to this page. This walkthrough here at the top tells you what every field is, what every option is that you can use to try and get a data set as close to what you need as possible. So if you're doing a report or doing some sort of summary on what species are happening, being reported, being found in a particular area, between particular dates, things like that, that's where this advanced query tool comes into play. You can play around with these filters. You can also open up even more filters with the advanced option at the top here. And you can see even more filters, but these are filters or parameters that can be applied to get you as close to the data set as you want. It starts out with a basic query of what's been reported that's positive and treated for the last month in Canada and the US. So this is all reviewed data that's coming through. And you can see what's come through in the last month. We've had about 2,500 records. And so you can build this query, and as long as it's under 200,000 records currently, you can then download that data set. Over on the right here, you can download it as a CSV, a KML, or a shapefile. If it's under 10,000 records, as this one is, you can save this query. And so I've saved that query. That query will now show up in my EDDMapS, and this query will also be able to be used in the EDDMapS Pro app, and that's something that Jerry and Kevin can talk about later. So if you have a report you're running regularly, every month, every quarter, every year, you can save that query, and instead of having to rebuild it every time, you can go into my EDDMapS and go to my saved queries, and it's probably on the next page. There's last month, and you can just click on that and it runs it again. So the next thing I want to talk about, let me back it up here. We have species locator. So if I click on that, I'm going to open it in a new tab again. There are currently 3 pages we have where you can see data in a different way based on other types of boundaries. So getting summaries of those data. So if we click on congressional district, here are these congressional districts are not the most up-to-date ones. We know that there's some conversations happening about certain congressional districts, so we have not updated these to the most recent ones. But if we click on congressional district 8 in Georgia, which is, I believe, the one we're in, this is going to give us a list of the species and the number of those records for those species that have been reported in this particular congressional district. So you can take this list and talk to someone and say, look, invasive species are a problem. Going back to species locator, status of species, we're going to click on this, and then I'm going to pick Georgia because that's where I am again. And this is a list of the species that you can say in Georgia. Again, it's the number of records and the number of counties that have those species in them. You can even go down to county. So if I pick Tift, these are the species that have been reported in Tift County. Again, this is reviewed records. Let's say I just cared about plants. I can remove the extra taxa I'm not concerned with. And now this is just the list of plants. Species distribution by other geographic locations. If you have a park, a forest, a wildlife refuge, things like that, you can see if we have those boundaries, and you would get a small map and a list of the records in those other geographic locations. So just make sure if you work at a type of place that isn't a state or a county or something like that, we may have that type of boundary, that forest, that park, in our data set that you can use to see what's going on there. So quickly, species info, that was something Chuck was talking about earlier. We're revamping that. Species listing. So these are where you can see lists that we have added to EDDMapS and to invasive.org. So you can see, let's just pick Virginia. They've got lists. These are the lists that we're aware of for Virginia. Some of these are going to be older. Some of these are going to be newer. Some of these might need to be updated because sometimes things change. But you can click on these. Let's look at Virginia noxious weeds. And this is the list we have for the Virginia noxious weeds. And you can see right now we have 8, but that may again need to be updated. So just let us know if you go through and you see we have a list that needs updating, just send us an email. So again, that's on that species listing page. Dashboard and tools, I went ahead and opened that. This is what I was talking about earlier. So you can get some very interesting information from here. You can set your dates, you can set your locations, if you want to include or exclude bulk data or different types of taxa. You can get bar graphs and charts and all kinds of stuff. And then in the top right here, you can download these into a PowerPoint. So that's something really interesting that we added maybe a year or so ago. So definitely take time to play around with this. The other way you can reach this dashboard is if you go to My EDDMapS and click on dashboards and click on EDDMapS dashboard. We also have your own dashboard, which is your reviewed records. And if you are a verifier, there's a verifier dashboard in case you weren't aware of that. We do have a way for you to see graphically what you've been reviewing. We also have, Chuck mentioned earlier that you could look up who the verifiers are. So if you click on directory, you can look up report verifiers. You can look up if there are expert reporters, and you can look up testing labs. So we do have some testing labs for things like rosette disease that are participating in the review process. And then we also have EDDMapS predictor. So these are those models I was telling you about earlier. So we have those future range and future certainty maps, future abundance habitat maps. You can go there, click on these, and see the species that we have those types of maps for. Yeah, that's another way of getting to those particular types of maps. We also have the invasive range expanders listing tool on here and the inhabit tool listed on here as well. And then finally, I want to briefly mention about the training page. So Chuck mentioned it earlier. So we are just getting started on loading these articles in here, but we are going to have updated versions of the training materials on here, but we also are going to have troubleshooting articles and like little how-to articles as well. This is also where we're going to have access and links to the PowerPoints that are being updated or have been updated, things like that. So here's a question we got earlier about the EDDMapS app. The species I want to report isn't in the EDDMapS app. I found species I want to report, but it isn't showing up in the map. And then here are some solutions we have on what you can do to check to see if you can fix that quickly. So we're going to have different kinds of things, all kinds of very new material that we're going to have available. And then finally, the last thing that we are going to also have is, if I go back here, the EDDMapS Studio. So if I click on that, these are some of the maps that are being created by projects in like Ag Pest Monitor, some of the stuff Chuck was talking about earlier. But we're also going to be adding, oh, look, we already added some EDDMapS data by county. We're going to be adding some other types of tools where you can pick and drop in different species. So this is a map where we're looking at tree of heaven and spotted lanternfly locations. So yellow is where tree of heaven's found, blue is where spotted lanternfly is found, and green is where both are being found. So these types of maps are going to be more easily able to be created by you. So this is something we're working on, creating a tool where you can very easily pick your parameters and the map is created. Here's another one where it's looking at, in this case, a biocontrol agent on two different subjects of host. So this is showing where the host is, where the biocontrol agent is, and both. So that's just a brief overview of our new tools / training page. And again, I'm rushing to the end. I'm trying not to step on your toes, Jerry, I promise.
Well, that was great. There are a couple of questions if you want to go through in the Q&A. Some of them might be good to leave to the end too when we have everyone here, but let's continue on. So we're going to actually start with Kevin Bailey from the Utah Weed Supervisors Association. So I'll welcome you to share your screen and begin your presentation.